Adrian Cole had always known that home was a place of appearances rather than comfort. The sleek apartment in the heart of the city gleamed with perfection from the outside, its modern architecture and polished floors giving off the illusion of serenity. Yet, beneath the sparkling surface, every hallway echoed with the subtle tremors of tension that had quietly defined his family for years. Adrian had learned early on to navigate these tremors, to predict which words would set off the carefully masked tempers of his parents. He moved through life with a practiced caution, masking thoughts and feelings as skillfully as a painter layering colors to hide the canvas beneath. Adrian Cole, his mother, was the kind of woman who commanded attention without ever raising her voice. Her presence filled the room, yet it carried with it a weight Adrian had come to associate with fear. She possessed an uncanny ability to sense unspoken intentions, and her disappointment was sharper than any raised hand could ever be. Her son's smallest mistakes, the ones unnoticed by anyone else, were scrutinized and filed away in her mind, catalogued for moments when she could confront, critique, or punish. Adrian had spent countless nights replaying her subtle expressions, the slight curl of her lip, the faint narrowing of her eyes, wondering if today would be the day she would finally pierce through his carefully constructed composure. Richard Cole, his father, was a man of few words but immense presence. Adrian had learned that silence, in his father's world, was not absence, but a deliberate statement. The man's stoicism often cloaked a deep, unreadable tension, a storm simmering beneath the surface. He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, it struck like thunder, a reminder of the fragile order in which their family existed. Adrian's memories of his father were patchworks of small gestures of approval and long stretches of chilling indifference, leaving him uncertain which moments were genuine and which were carefully calculated. Performances. Leela, Adrian's younger sister, was a storm of energy and rebellion. Her laughter could fill a room, but so could her sharp tongue and biting sarcasm. She had a talent for exposing the fissures in their family's facade, often deliberately testing boundaries just to see how the adults would respond. Her relationship with Adrian was complicated, a mixture of camaraderie and rivalry, a shared understanding of their mother's controlling nature, and the silent competition for their father's rare approvals. The day began like any other, with the city buzzing beneath the apartment windows and the hum of distant traffic, creating a background score for the brewing domestic tension. Adrian awoke to the smell of strong coffee and the faint sound of his mother's heels clicking against the marble floor. She was already dressed for the day, immaculate as always, her expression a delicate balance between stern expectation and barely concealed irritation. She regarded him with a calm precision that made him uneasy, the kind of look that silently catalogued every fault, every flaw, every hidden thought he had tried so hard to conceal. "Morning, Adrian," Evelyn said, her voice smooth, almost deceptively gentle. "Did you sleep well?" Adrian nodded, cautious, aware that the slightest hesitation or overeagerness could be misread. "Yes, Mom, I slept fine." Richard, seated at the dining table with a newspaper spread before him, barely looked up. His fingers drummed lightly against the paper, a rhythm Adrian had come to recognize as either boredom or brewing disapproval. The silence that followed was oppressive, filled with unspoken rules and carefully avoided truths. Leela burst into the kitchen moments later, her hair a mess of rebellion and her eyes glinting with mischief. Finally awake, she teased, plopping down across from Adrian. "You look like you've been hiding from life or something." Adrian offered a small, polite smile, understanding that Lila's teasing was both a shield and a weapon she could provoke without consequence, knowing their mother would intervene only if it suited her narrative of control. The conversation turned mundane, fragments of plans, reminders, and subtle critiques weaving through the air like an invisible web. Adrian felt the weight of his mother's gaze, the quiet calculations of his father, and the unpredictable energy of his sister. Each word spoken, each pause, carried with it layers of meaning that stretched far beyond their apparent simplicity. It was exhausting, this daily performance of normalcy, yet it was what had shaped him, trained him to observe, analyze, and survive. But beneath the surface of this ordinary morning, Adrian sensed the undercurrents of something darker, a subtle shift that he couldn't yet name. His mother's gaze lingered longer than usual on certain objects in the kitchen, as if she were inspecting memories themselves rather than mere utensils. His father's silence was heavier, almost charged, hinting at thoughts too dangerous to voice aloud, and Leela, usually so confident in her provocations, seemed to hesitate at times, as if sensing an unspoken threat in the atmosphere that none of them could name. It was a tension that gnawed at him, a quiet anxiety that settled in the pit of his stomach. He realized, almost with a sense of reluctant clarity, that something was coming, something that would disrupt the fragile equilibrium of their family life. The questions circled his mind, relentless. What had his mother hidden from him all these years? What secrets lay buried beneath the polished surfaces of their home? And most haunting of all, what role would he be forced to play when the truth finally emerged? Adrian rose, moving mechanically through the motions of preparing for the day. The city beyond their windows was alive with possibility and danger alike, a reminder that life continued beyond the confining walls of the apartment. Yet, as he glanced at his reflection in the sleek, mirrored wall, he couldn't shake the feeling that the danger he sensed was not out there in the streets but here, within the very walls that were supposed to protect him. And for the first time in years, Adrian felt a chill of anticipation, not excitement, not fear entirely, but a mixture that left him both wary and alert. Something was about to break. He knew it, though what exactly remained just beyond the edge of his understanding. The city outside was a restless hum, a constant reminder that life moved forward regardless of the shadows within Adrian Cole's apartment. Yet inside those walls, time seemed to distort, moments stretching with an almost deliberate patience, as if the very air waited to reveal the truth. Adrian had begun to notice small discrepancies, tiny, seemingly insignificant details that gnawed at the edges of his mind. A photograph misplaced, a tone in his mother's voice that didn't quite fit, a fleeting glance between his parents that suggested conversations he wasn't meant to overhear. It began the evening after work. Adrian returned to the apartment with the intention of collapsing into the familiar routine, yet the atmosphere felt heavier, charged with a silent electricity that made his skin prickle. The smell of coffee lingered, but it was sharper somehow, almost metallic. His mother was in the living room, arranging flowers with meticulous precision, her hands moving with the steady grace of someone attempting to impose order on a chaotic world. Her eyes flicked to him briefly, and he felt that familiar, unnerving weight of evaluation. "Did you finish your project at work?" Evelyn asked, her voice calm, almost casual, but Adrian sensed an undercurrent, a question not about his work, but about something unspoken. "Yes, Mom," he replied, though the brevity of his answer seemed to satisfy her. Yet the pause that followed was heavier than any conversation he had shared with her before. His instincts told him that beneath the surface of her question was a probe, an attempt to measure his reactions, to read the unspoken fears he had learned to hide. Richard, seated in his usual chair, didn't look up from his newspaper, but Adrian caught the flicker of his eyes, the slight tightening around the corners, a subtle signal that told him more than words ever could. There was an unease in his father, a tension Adrian hadn't seen in months, and Leela, sprawled across the sofa with a book she wasn't really reading, seemed sharper, more alert, as if she sensed the undercurrent Adrian had begun to recognize. That night, sleep was elusive. Adrian lay awake, tracing the day's events in his mind, turning over every interaction, every glance. The apartment, which usually felt suffocatingly familiar, now seemed alien, each shadow a potential hiding place for secrets. And in the quiet hours, he began to remember fragments of conversations, phrases from years past, moments that had seemed trivial at the time, but now appeared layered with hidden meaning. The next morning, the tension escalated. Adrian found a note slipped under his door, written in his mother's precise handwriting. "We need to talk. Tonight. Alone." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made his stomach knot. Alone, that single word twisted in his mind, igniting a cascade of anxious speculation. What could she possibly want to discuss alone? And why now, after years of careful normalcy? He tried to go about his day as usual, navigating the bustling streets of the city, the blaring horns, and neon lights serving as a temporary distraction. But nothing could silence the echoing uncertainty that grew louder with each passing hour. At work, he found himself analyzing interactions not for professional reasons, but as exercises in anticipation, trying to predict human behavior, as if the same skills could shield him from whatever awaited at home. Even Leela seemed to sense the change. That evening, she appeared unusually quiet, her usual sarcasm and teasing replaced with subtle questions. "Have you noticed anything weird lately?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Probing, Adrian hesitated, unsure if he should reveal his growing suspicions. Lila's curiosity was both a comfort and a danger. While she could provide insight, she could also escalate matters unpredictably. When night fell, Adrian returned to the apartment with a careful sense of preparation. Though he wasn't sure what he was preparing for, the note weighed in his pocket. Like a small stone, constant and immovable, Evelyn was waiting, her expression inscrutable. As if she had rehearsed this moment countless times, she gestured toward the living room. "Sit," she said simply, and Adrian obeyed, the familiar anxiety coiling in his chest. The conversation began cautiously, Evelyn circling around the topic, testing his reactions. Her words were measured, each phrase deliberate, each pause carefully timed. She spoke of family responsibilities, expectations, and loyalty, but there was a tension beneath, an almost imperceptible tremor that hinted at secrets she was guarding. Adrian listened, analyzing, dissecting every word for hidden meaning, every silence for clues. Then she paused, her gaze fixed on him with unnerving intensity. "Adrian, there are things you don't understand about this family, things you haven't been told, and you need to know them. But you have to promise me you'll stay calm." The air seemed to thicken, heavy with anticipation. Adrian's mind raced, constructing possibilities, scenarios, and questions. What could she be referring to? What had been hidden all these years? And more importantly, why had she chosen now to reveal it? Before he could respond, a noise from the kitchen drew their attention. Leela appeared, her expression unreadable, her movements deliberate. She didn't speak, but her presence alone added another layer of tension, an unspoken warning that the evening would be far more complicated than Adrian had imagined. As the night deepened, Adrian realized that the fragile equilibrium of his family life was beginning to crumble. Secrets that had been carefully buried were surfacing, and the roles he had known, son, brother, observer, were shifting into something less familiar, less safe. The shadows of the apartment seemed to lengthen, the walls closing in with the weight of anticipation. He understood, with a clarity that was both frightening and liberating, that his family was not merely hiding truths they were protecting, manipulating, and perhaps even deceiving him in ways he had never imagined. And somewhere beneath the surface, a darker force seemed to be at work, an invisible current pulling at the threads of their lives, testing loyalties and exposing vulnerabilities. Adrian knew that the coming days would demand more than caution. They would demand courage, insight, and the willingness to confront realities he had long avoided. As he lay awake that night, listening to the faint sounds of the city, he realized that the true battle had only just begun. The secrets were unraveling, one careful step at a time, and Adrian Cole was standing at the edge of an abyss he could neither fully comprehend nor escape. The city had a rhythm that night, but Adrian felt out of sync with it. Neon signs flickered like broken promises, and distant sirens blended with the low hum of the subway. Walking back from a late-night errand, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following him. Every shadow seemed alive, every reflection in a store window a distorted version of himself. Inside the apartment, the tension had grown unbearable. Evelyn had gone quiet since their conversation, her presence almost spectral. Richard remained distant, absorbed in tasks that seemed trivial yet deliberate, as if he were guarding something invisible. And Leela had begun to move with uncanny precision, entering rooms exactly when Adrian's thoughts wavered, appearing as if she knew more than she should. Adrian started noticing inconsistencies. A drawer in the study slightly ajar, a document that didn't belong on the kitchen counter, and sometimes brief glimpses of a figure moving outside the apartment window. The lines between reality and suspicion blurred, and Adrian began questioning even his own perceptions. He tried to confide in Leela that night. "Have you noticed anything strange?" he asked. Voice low, almost conspiratorial, Leela's eyes sharpened, a flicker of knowing passing through her gaze. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "but you have to be careful, Adrian. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen." Her words echoed in his mind long after she left the room. The apartment, once familiar and safe, felt like a labyrinth, each corner hiding truths that refused to surface. Adrian's dreams were restless. Visions of hidden doors, muffled voices, and shadowy figures haunted his sleep. He began documenting everything, small notes, sketches, observations, all in an effort to regain control over the spiraling uncertainty. The breaking point came unexpectedly. Late one evening, Adrian found a letter hidden behind a loose brick. In the fireplace, the handwriting was unfamiliar, precise, almost mechanical. The words were chilling. "You are closer than you think. The truth watches. Trust no one." Adrian's pulse quickened. He reread the message, searching for context, for clues, for anything to explain who had left it and why. His family was no longer just the source of tension, they were now part of an intricate puzzle he was only beginning to decipher. In the days that followed, Adrian became obsessed with uncovering patterns. He analyzed phone records, revisited old photographs, and retraced past conversations. Each discovery brought more questions than answers. A family friend's cryptic remark, a business associate's vague warning, a neighbor's suspicious behavior, all threads that might lead to clarity or further confusion. One evening, Adrian confronted Richard directly. "Dad, is there something you're not telling me? Something about us?" Richard's eyes darkened, a shadow crossing his face. "There are things best left buried," he said quietly, yet firmly. "Some truths aren't meant for discovery." But Adrian couldn't let it go. The whispers in the city, the subtle signs at home, the growing unease in his mind, they demanded answers. And as he dug deeper, he realized the boundaries of trust were dissolving. Evelyn's calm demeanor was no longer comforting, it was calculated. Lila's sharpness, once playful, now seemed almost predatory. The very people he had relied upon were becoming pieces of a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. One night, drawn by a sudden impulse, Adrian followed a lead outside the apartment. Across dimly lit streets, through alleys slick with rain, he found himself at an old, abandoned building, windows broken, walls scrawled with messages that seemed both random and deliberate. And there, faintly illuminated by flickering streetlights, he saw movement, a shadowy figure retreating into the darkness. Heart racing, Adrian pursued, but the figure vanished. In its place, he found another note. "The closer you get, the more you lose. Choose carefully." The warnings were relentless. Each step forward met with a new challenge, a new layer of the puzzle. Adrian realized that the city itself was no longer just a backdrop, it was an active participant in the unfolding drama, a labyrinth designed to test his resolve. Returning home, he confronted Evelyn once more. Her calm, measured expression remained, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something darker, something unreadable. "Adrian," she said softly, "there are forces you don't understand, and some truths can break you." Yet, despite the danger, Adrian felt a strange exhilaration. The fear, the suspense, the thrill of discovery, it was intoxicating. He knew that the path ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand intellect, intuition, and an unflinching willingness to face truths that might shatter his understanding of family, reality, and himself. As he lay awake that night, Adrian understood that the journey had reached a new stage. The fragments of hidden truths were converging. The shadows within his apartment and the city beyond were intertwining, and the fragile veneer of normalcy was fracturing. Every choice mattered. Every observation could be the key or the trap. And somewhere in the darkness, a silent observer waited, patient and knowing. As Adrian Cole stepped deeper into the labyrinth of secrets that would define the rest of his life, the city seemed to close in on Adrian as the days passed. Each street, each cafe, each familiar corner felt like a stage set, constructed to observe him, to test him. Sleep became a stranger. Every time he closed his eyes, he was haunted by fragmented memories, whispers of conversations he couldn't fully recall, and the faint echo of footsteps that weren't there. Inside the apartment, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Evelyn moved like a shadow through the rooms, her presence almost imperceptible, yet oppressive. Richard remained enigmatic, always one step ahead, his gaze too sharp, his words too measured. And Leela, she had begun leaving subtle signs, objects, out of place, notes with cryptic messages, all suggesting that she knew more than she revealed. One evening, Adrian discovered a hidden drawer in Richard's study, a compartment that seemed to exist solely to conceal something important. Inside, he found a collection of letters, photographs, and documents. Each item hinted at a life carefully concealed from him. Old correspondences between Richard and unknown associates hinted at financial dealings and decisions that had shaped Adrian's life without his knowledge. Among them was a photograph of a younger Richard with a woman Adrian didn't recognize. Their expressions tense, secretive, almost conspiratorial. Questions flooded his mind. Who was this woman? Why had Richard kept her hidden? And how did it connect to the growing unease that had enveloped their family? Adrian confronted Richard later that night. Who is she? He demanded, holding up the photograph. What's going on? Richard's face darkened. Some truths are dangerous, Adrian. They aren't meant to be uncovered. But I need to know. I can't live like this. In suspicion and fear, Richard's eyes hardened, a shadow crossing his expression. Then be careful. Curiosity can be deadly. The warning did little to quell Adrian's determination. If anything, it fueled it. He began retracing his father's steps, revisiting old locations, contacting people who had once been close to the family. Every answer led to more questions. Every revelation deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, Lila's behavior grew increasingly unpredictable. She would appear silently behind Adrian, whispering hints, leading him to discoveries that seemed both helpful and manipulative. Adrian couldn't decide if she was an ally or a threat, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. One night, driven by a sudden impulse, Adrian followed a lead to an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the city. Inside, he found remnants of old surveillance equipment, files scattered across dusty tables, and photographs pinned to a wall. Images of him, Evelyn, Richard, and Leela, taken without their knowledge. The realization hit him with a cold, suffocating fear. They were being watched, monitored, manipulated. A faint rustle behind him made him spin around, but the shadows swallowed the sound. In the dim light, a piece of paper fluttered to the ground. It read, "You are closer than you think. Trust no one completely." The note confirmed his growing paranoia. The labyrinth wasn't just within the apartment, it extended into the city, into every corner of his life. Someone or something was orchestrating events, guiding him, testing him, pushing him to the edge of his sanity. Returning home, Adrian noticed subtle changes in Evelyn's demeanor. She was colder, more calculated, her calmness now tinged with a dangerous precision. Even Richard's protective facade seemed to be cracking, revealing glimpses of secrets too burdensome to bear. And Leela, her cryptic messages, had shifted from hints to direct commands, guiding Adrian toward discoveries he both feared and desired. The nights became longer, each filled with restless wandering through the city, following leads that seemed to dissolve into shadows. Adrian's journal grew thick with observations, sketches, and theories. He charted patterns in the city, noting unusual movements, mysterious figures, and coincidences that seemed almost too precise to be random. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A hidden message in one of the letters hinted at a location, a safe house long abandoned, linked to Richard's past and the woman in the photograph. Adrian realized that the truth was no longer just about his family. It was about a network of secrets, spanning years, carefully hidden, and now unraveling before him. Determined to uncover everything, Adrian prepared for the confrontation that would define the next stage of his life. He didn't know what he would find: danger, betrayal, revelation, but he understood that turning back was no longer an option. Every step forward carried risk, but also the promise of truth. As he stepped into the night, the city seemed alive, with unseen eyes. Every shadow was a potential threat, every whisper a clue. Adrian knew that the journey into the depths of deception was far from over. The veils were lifting, but the darkness beneath them was only growing stronger. And somewhere, In the labyrinth of secrets, a presence watched, patient, calculating, ensuring that Adrian's path would be one of revelation and of inevitable confrontation. The city's skyline glowed with artificial serenity, but Adrian felt only the weight of impending revelation pressing down on him, every corner. Every alley seemed alive with whispers, as if the streets themselves were conspiring against him. The investigation had led him to a single, inevitable destination: the abandoned safe house Richard had hidden for decades. Tied to the woman in the photograph and the network of secrets controlling their family, Adrian's hands trembled as he pushed open the rusted doors. Dust hung in the air like suspended memories, and the faint scent of decay filled the vast, empty hall. On the walls, photographs, maps, and strings connecting faces and locations created a chaotic web of the past and present. He saw images of himself as a child, Evelyn, Leela, and Richard, their lives documented in ways that were intimate, invasive, and terrifying. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows. "I knew you'd come here eventually." Adrian spun around. From the darkness emerged the woman in the photograph. Her presence was commanding, unsettling. Her eyes seemed to pierce through him, reading the layers of doubt, fear, and anger he had buried. "You," Adrian whispered, disbelief and anger warring inside him. "Who are you? What is all this?" She smiled, a chilling mixture of warmth and menace. "I'm the architect of truths you weren't ready to see. Your father, your family. None of it is as simple as it appears." Richard stepped from the shadows, his face pale but resolute. "Adrian, this is the final piece. You needed to understand, but some truths are heavier than you realize." Adrian felt a surge of betrayal, confusion, and rage. "You've been hiding everything. My whole life, you manipulated it." Richard's voice was steady. "Not to manipulate, to protect. And yet, some mistakes cannot be undone." The woman gestured toward a table cluttered with letters and recordings. "These hold everything. Every conversation, every plan, every deception. Choose what you see. But beware once you know. There's no going back." Adrian hesitated, his mind torn between the desire for truth and the terror of consequences. He opened the first envelope. The letters revealed financial manipulations, family betrayals, and long-hidden crimes that spanned decades. Secrets about Richard's dealings with powerful figures, Evelyn's covert alliances, and even Lila's enigmatic role in guiding him. They all converged into a terrifying portrait of orchestrated control. The psychological weight was unbearable. Adrian realized the city, his family, even his closest allies had been part of a meticulously constructed web, and he was only now seeing the threads. Paranoia and mistrust surged, but a grim clarity followed. To survive, he would have to act decisively, and alone. Then came the confrontation he had anticipated. Leela appeared, her eyes calculating yet fearful. "Adrian, you don't understand what's at stake. If you expose everything, it will destroy us all. But I can't live like this anymore." Adrian snapped. "I need the truth, no matter the cost." The tension escalated into a psychological chess match. Accusations, confessions, and revelations flew with the intensity of years of suppressed conflict. Each character revealed their true motivations: Richard's protective lies, Evelyn's concealed schemes, Lila's manipulative guidance, all culminating in a revelation that shook Adrian to his core. His own decisions, his own doubts, had been anticipated, manipulated, and recorded long before he acted. As dawn approached, Adrian emerged from the safe house, the city awakening around him like a silent observer of his descent into knowledge. He understood now that the labyrinth of deception was not merely external. It had always been within him. Every suspicion, every paranoia, every instinct had been shaped by the family, the city, and the unseen architect in the shadows. And yet, even with the truth, he could not fully untangle the threads. The city still whispered. The shadows still watched. The psychological game had ended, but its consequences were only beginning. Adrian walked into the morning light, a man forever changed, burdened by truth, haunted by suspicion, and yet strangely empowered by his survival. Somewhere in the hidden corners of the city, the architect observed, satisfied that the game had reached its climax, but knowing full well that the next move could come at any time. The mirrors were shattered, but the reflections of the past, the present, and the future remained fractured, dancing in the shadows, leaving Adrian to navigate a world where certainty was a luxury and paranoia a permanent companion. The city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Adrian's new apartment. It was quiet here, deceptively calm, but the silence felt heavy, like the air itself remembered the chaos. Weeks had passed since that stormy night, the night when Evelyn's secret spilled, Richard's control shattered, and Lila's unexpected courage had changed everything. Adrian thought the nightmare had ended, yet some part of him knew that certain shadows never fully vanished. He often found himself replaying every confrontation in his mind, dissecting words, gestures, even the pauses between them. Every laugh, every whisper now seemed layered with hidden meaning. The city pulsed outside, oblivious to the invisible scars that haunted him, and yet, in those neon reflections, Adrian sometimes thought he saw shapes that weren't. Entirely his own. Evelyn had disappeared from the public eye, her social media accounts gone, leaving only fragments of a past life behind. Richard faced investigations that stripped him of his weight of power. Though Adrian suspected the man's manipulations were far from finished, Lila, resilient and quietly defiant, returned to her work with a renewed sense of purpose. Though the fire in her eyes hinted that the past was never truly behind her, Adrian walked along the streets, late at night, sometimes drawn to places that reminded him of fear, testing himself. He had learned to live with uncertainty, to accept that danger often comes not as a shout, but as a whisper. And yet, beneath this careful composure, a subtle thrill lingered, the kind that makes a person alert to the tiniest shift, the faintest signal that reality might be bending just beyond perception. In the end, the city remained as it always was, dazzling, indifferent, full of stories waiting to be discovered and some, perhaps, waiting to consume the ones who thought they had survived. Adrian knew one truth above all: survival wasn't the same as peace. And somewhere, deep in the folds of his mind, a shadow smiled. The night stretched endlessly, carrying whispers of past fears, present resilience, and future uncertainties. In a city that never truly sleeps, the story had ended, but the echoes would linger forever. If you like history, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.